Hey everyone, Ripley Sellers with Bob's Watches. I'm here in the studio with Justin for another episode of Vintage of the Week, where we pull aside one remarkable timepiece and share with you exactly why we love it. Well, before we get into it, this is a really cool one, but what do you have on? Quick wrist check.
I got something a little bit different. It's Red Line Day. I got the memo, so I'm not going with the standard. I'm going with the Tudor P01.
Super cool, super
Really
funky.
interesting watch, right?
I remember when we saw the leak before that
Yes.
came out, everyone thought it was just a fake, it was someone trolling, but no, that it's here, it's real. And I'm surprised it doesn't get more attention for as weird a watch as it is.
Exactly.
I'm so surprised it doesn't get more
And
attention.
I have to give it some credit because when the leak first came out and I saw it, I was definitely not impressed. It didn't do it for me. And after wearing it for a little bit, I actually kind of dig it. It's quirky and it's weird, and I kind of like it.
If that had been made by Rolex, you know it would be the most in-demand, craziest piece.
Yeah.
It's just like, them leaning into their military history.
Yeah.
I think it was honestly a little bit too quirky for at the time, and now it's sort of forgotten about, but...
I gotta give it to Tudor for going outside the box.
I'm so happy they did it.
Yeah, me too. Like, even if you don't love it, I still like that they did it, What do you got on today?
Also got the red line memo, so... Yeah, 1680
nice.
red sub. Thought it would make a good pairing to what we have today, which is a double red Sea Dweller.
Lovely watch.
So, I mean, the same way that when they first added a date to the sub, they made its name red.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing happened with the Sea Dweller. So, it was the 67, it was when the Sea Dweller formally came out, and kind of the purpose of the Sea Dweller was, a lot of people think, saturation diving, but it's the very first Sea Dwellers, the single reds, they didn't all have valves. It was more about the date display.
Mm-hmm.
People were living underwater during like Sea Lab and stuff, those missions, and so they needed more water resistance and a way to keep track of time. Of course, when the Sea Dweller came out in 67, its party piece is the helium gas escape valve located at the 9 o'clock side. But when they first did it, it was it was kind of seen almost as like a Submariner counterpart. And
right.
As you see here, it says Sea Dweller up at the top line in red, and then below it, Submariner 2000.
Yeah, very similar to the the red sub that we covered last week. I personally like the Sea Dweller a little bit better. I like the double red. It's kind of like, well, if one line of red's not enough for you, and you want to go all in with the red, you get the double red. I personally like it. I like that it doesn't have the Cyclops. That's just a personal thing with me. I prefer, just that clean crystal without the Cyclops. And I just think it's a great looking watch. I love that double red.
Yeah, I think the 1665 is a really interesting watch in terms of Rolex's history. Also super unique among Sea Dwellers, since it's not only the first, also the only one to feature an acrylic crystal. Mm-hmm. The subsequent reference, the 666, is a very different watch compared to this one. But it might be, we've often said it before in reference to the Sea Dweller, it might be Rolex's most purpose-built model.
Yeah.
Not just purpose-built for scuba divers, purpose-built for commercial saturation divers, or otherwise someone living in a helium-rich environment.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a handful of people in the world.
Right.
And you can really, I think it really symbolizes sort of what Rolex was doing, I guess, between the 50s and the 70s, as far as just leaning into that tool watch heritage. And, the two double lines of red text, it's very much calling attention to its, increased depth rating.
Right.
It's more of a tool at this point in its history rather than anything exclusive.
Exactly. And that's kind of how I feel about the Sea Dweller. It's kind of like Rolex's bigger, more capable brother of the Submariner, and it's displayed. And like you said, the double lines of red text kind of allude to that and make it apparent. And I like the styling. I like that it's different. It's not super different, but it's enough different and enough the same to kind of work together without being the same watch. And like you said, it's very purpose built, probably more so than any other Rolex. I like the double lines of red. I think it's really nice. It's close enough to the Submariner, that it still feels like it's in the same family, but it's not too far out. Yeah, exactly. I think it's a great pair.
Yeah, I think, we've said it before, just how having a little pop of red makes a huge difference when it comes to it. But having two lines of red text versus one also makes a pretty impactful difference here. I mean, the Sea Dweller really is its own watch now more
Sure.
than ever. But
Right.
the fact that the original double reds say Submariner on their dials themselves, I think is kind of special and lets you know that at this point it wasn't quite clear that it was its own watch in the same way that the Deep Sea is part of the Sea Dweller collection. But obviously now things have differed quite a bit. But even within the double red Sea Dwellers, you know, that was obviously the first one that came out in '67. They were doing the double reds. The Sea Dweller 1665 itself was produced up until the end of the 1970s, but around 1978, which is when this example was produced, that's when they stopped doing the 2 lines of red text,
Right.
switched to the great white with the all white text, and that's what they continued on to the rest of it. But within the double red category, there's a wealth of different variations. This is a Mark IV dial, so you get that kind of that very pointy Rolex coronet up at top. And then if you also notice, the Sea Dweller name, the first line of red text, is bigger than the
Right.
secondary line, which is, you know, just another little variation, but also kind of highlights the Sea Dweller name a little bit more.
Yeah, a little bit of a headliner down there for the Sea Dweller text. This is a great example, and it's a great way to show how this watch has aged. Because with vintage watches, that's a big part to me, and I'm sure a lot of other people out there, is not only the condition, but just the way it's aged, the patina, the coloring, all that. And this one, it really is a nice comparison because you can see it next to the Submariner that's in very good shape, right?
Yeah.
You can see that the beautiful color that this bezel has turned. It's like a kind of a slate blue-gray color. It's not really faded out. It's not really light. It's still that dark bezel. But I mean, next to the pretty deep black of the Submariner bezel, you can see that it has a gorgeous patina on there.
Yeah, kind of like a deep graphite color.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course, the lume on the hands and dial and everything is really nice and sort of matches
That's
as well.
like that's a real kind of creamy yellow color on the lume, which I really like. It's more subtle on the Submariner next to it. It's really apparent on you know, the color of the lume when you can see them next to each other. And also, it's a nice contrast with the paint on the dial, like where it says Rolex and the coronet, and you know, the lines underneath the Sea Dweller that are white. I like having the lume be a different color than those. It's kind of just adds another little element. I mean, you know, it was tritium, so it's obviously aged differently than the paint, and I think it's just kind of a nice touch. It's just one more element and one more little piece of character to a vintage watch, which I think is great.
Yeah, and people always like the Sea Dweller, at least the older Sea Dwellers, because it doesn't have that Cyclops lens. Just looking at it like this, you know, one does offer a more symmetrical appearance.
Sure.
And just beyond that, look at the case of them. The 1680 Sub, even with its top hat crystal versus the Sea Dweller, one is quite a bit chunkier of a watch.
Yeah.
And obviously, also worth pointing out about the Sea Dweller, it's one of the few Rolexes with an engraving on its case back. You know, one that speaks to its helium escape valve there.
Right.
And that's just not something you see all that often. And,
Yeah, Rolex doesn't do that very
also
often
worth
at all.
pointing out, it's straight rather than kind of engraved all the way around. But a really lovely piece, and you know, these are kind of another one where you see them in a lot of different sorts of condition. You know, some are very well preserved, some are you know, don't have their red line dials anymore.
Right.
And that's always a sad thing when that happens. But I think, you know, for someone looking for a double red Sea Dweller, that's already kind of a bit rarefied
Sure.
air. You can start being choosy at that point, and this is not a, you know, you're not going to, there's no gilt dial version,
Sure.
you know what
Yeah.
I mean? So this is sort of the peak of Sea Dwellerism before you get to like the single red where there's 12 known examples.
Right.
And,
Yeah, this one's gorgeous. I love it. We talked about before, I want my vintage watch to look vintage. I love that. I mean, there's something to be said for the new old stock, but to have that character is nice, and to me it adds to the whole vintage watch experience. And this one has that without being too beat up or too scratched or too replaced or all that stuff, you know. It's like the bezels, it's got a beautiful patina, but it's in great shape, which is, you don't see that a whole lot. A lot of times it has a great patina because it's seen a lot of stuff, but it's also nicked up, or, you know, it's got some dents and scratches. This one, to me, it's beautiful because it has all the great patina and the color shifts that happens over decades, but not a lot of the hardcore scratches and wear.
Yeah, 100%. I think also worth pointing out is the current production stainless steel Sea Dweller, the 43mm model ceramic bezel Cyclops on it, also has a red line of text.
Yes.
A single one, which kind of calls back the very first.
It's going back to
the
this,
prototype
yeah.
single red Sea Dweller. But it is interesting that, you know, the Sea Dweller having its name in red text is something that dates back to the very first one and even before the first one, and then for the 50th anniversary, Rolex has brought it back. So having red on a Sea Dweller dial is very, very true to the history of the Sea Dweller.
Yeah.
And if you really want to go back to kind of where that started with the double red, you get, like you said, not one to two. One's good, two's better. Although if you do have a single red Sea Dweller from the original one, you have something incredibly rare. There's 12 or technically 11 because one has a dial replacement. But I think in terms of watches that you can actually buy that exist and are available, double red Sea Dweller is peak of Sea Dweller dumb.
Yeah, I love it. Can we do one more comparison if you take off the red sub? I'm curious what you and everyone else thinks. Just since you're wearing this one, and this is such a great pair and a great comparison, I want to know what you think. Personally, I prefer the Sea Dweller. I prefer the double red Sea Dweller over the Submariner, and I love the Submariner, and it's arguably more iconic of a watch, but I prefer the Sea Dweller. I just prefer the look of it, and if I had to choose one of these two, I think I would go with the Sea Dweller. What do you think?
Oh, I would as well. Yeah, I think I love the red sub. I own a sub, not a red sub, but I mean, it's a double red Sea Dweller. The double red Sea Dweller is just kind of stands out within Rolex's history. Is one of the most intentional Rolex tool watches. And I'd love to own that. Obviously, the red sub also an icon, but the red sub to me almost represents more of the point when the sub first started to slightly edge its way towards not being just a dive watch. Which is also an important point because it's literally one of the most famous watches of all time, and it started its life as a purpose-built tool. Sea Dweller was very much a purpose-built tool, and this is probably in its most purpose-built execution. This is long before Rolex was a luxury brand. This was specifically invented to meet the needs that the Submariner couldn't. And if I could only choose one, I'm getting between these two, it's going to be the double red.
Pure tool watch, in the truest sense of the word. Well, I'm curious. What do you guys think? Do you like the double red Sea Dweller or the red Submariner? I have a feeling that we have a lot of opinions on both sides of those, but leave us a comment below. Let us know which one you would take.
Well, that about wraps it up for this episode of Vintage of the Week. Absolutely stunning double red Sea Dweller, reference 1665. Don't forget to tune into our next episode and see what watch we'll have for you then.